What's up guys, ADCZ here, welcome back to Yugioh Deck of the Day. Today we have a deck that has kind of been forgotten ever since it got its final adjustments to the ban list. So we're taking a look at True Draco today. I think the deck has lost pretty much all of its play that it was seeing as an anti-meta deck because the deck is not really that consistent anymore. But with the release of Pantheism of the Monarchs back to 3, I think the deck has found a little bit of synergy with some other deck that helps it pretty much get to its win condition while also giving it a new one as well. So I think this True Draco build right here is kind of a nice way to take a new update to the True Draco strategy that you might want to try it out. So if you're a fan of the deck before, but you've kind of lost your interest because the deck isn't really seeing play and nobody thinks that the deck is good, you can try this build out and see how it works. I think it's a really good build. So if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming videos, and now let's get to the deck profile. So for the monsters, we're starting off with 1 Dynamite. Unfortunately, Dynamite is still at 1 along with Return, even though Diagram and Carve Demise have both been hit to 1 as well. Hopefully someday Konami will give us back 3 Dynamite, because then we can cut the ratios from the other 2 monsters so we can play more copies of Dynamite, because Dynamite is by far the best one because it gives you access to the trap cards. But now, with just 1 Dynamite, I think you have to max out on the other 2 monsters as well, mainly because with 1 copy of Diagram, 1 copy of Terraforming, the deck doesn't really have enough access to monsters. So if you don't draw 1, then you basically lose access to a lot of Floodgates and a lot of cards that can trigger with when sent to the graveyard when going second. So you have to have monsters in your hand to basically be able to play. So it's better to have more monsters than you want to than having none. So this is why I think is a good enough reason to play a lot of monsters. So with that, we play also 3 copies of Ignis Hit. Ignis gives you access to the spell cards. We have 1 interaction coming back from back in the day when we used to have Zoo. Now that Zoo is becoming a relevant deck again, when you're going second, if you tribute a trap for your Ignis Hit and then you summon it and try to pop Dryden with a trap card, if Dryden uses her effect forcefully because she's about to be popped on Ignis, then you can get a copy of Heritage and then you can get the 2 draws out of that. So that's a cool interaction against that deck. So Ignis is better going second and Dynamite is better going first. But I also play 3 copies of Majesty Maiden because, like I said, you need to see monsters, and these 3 are the only monsters worth playing in the deck. You can play cards like Amano Iwato, Inspector Border and stuff like that if you want to, but I think these cards a little bit win more. They're only good going first. Amano Iwato is good going second, but with only 1 copy of Diagram, it's not like you will draw Amano Iwato and consistently a way to break your opponent's board because you don't have access to your traps very easily with only 1 Diagram. So this is why I think this card may be in the side deck for better use. So I'm only main decking these 7 monsters to make sure that I get a True Draco monster in my hand along with a spell, and then maybe I can back it up with an Erupt or a Domain of the Monarchs, and hopefully this will be enough to lock my opponent out of playing the game, and then I can start getting more advantage and just poking them out with my True Draco monster till you win the game. So this is basically a strategy that True Draco used to have. It's still the strategy True Draco has because as its own strategy, the deck is very weak. The deck fits very well with Floodgates, was never intended to be played with Floodgates, but this is the way the community has found that it's the only way to win without Masterpiece, because Masterpiece was a win condition on its own, but now the deck doesn't have its own win condition, so Floodgates is the only way to go. So for the spell cards, we have 3 copies of True Draco Heritage, by far the best spell because it gives you access to your Floodgates. This is the one you want to see early game. You want to be able to basically send all your monsters, spells and traps to the grave so you can hopefully draw 3. Do not be afraid to send a monster to the grave as well. The Diagram, if this gives you another draw, especially if you do have another monster in your hand, because this 1 extra draw might give you a Floodgate that will help you the win game, because you can't have a monster, but if you don't have the Floodgate or a Domain, then you're not going to win the game. So yep, I think you need to be playing very recklessly with this card so you can get the most use out of it. 3 copies of Disciples. This is a card that keeps you in the game during the grind game, and this is one deck that gets to the grind game because it's a control deck. It's a very control deck. It's not something like Sky Strikers have become, where you basically have the access code so you can go for game whenever you see an opportunity. This deck has to see monsters in order to go for game. This deck has to grind in order to go for game, because it's something like you can't do turn 1 unless you draw a bunch of monsters with the traps and your opponent doesn't really have anything on the field. Then yes, if you do that, then maybe you can OTK, but it doesn't happen very often. So this card, by shuffling 3 True Draco cards from your grave to the deck, you draw a card, and also the True Draco spells, when they go to the grave from the field, they destroy a spell and trap on the field, so these are really good. So you need to max out on both of them. 1 copy of Diagram and 1 copy of Terraforming. Yeah, unfortunately, I think this is even a bigger hit to the deck than Card of Demise going to 1. And because Card of Demise, yes, it seems unfair, especially when you resolve it multiple times during a duel, but Diagram is the one that gets you exactly what you need. Drawing cards, yes, seems powerful, but is random. You might see stuff you already have, or stuff that you don't really want to have. But Diagram gets you your cards to the grave, so you fuel your Disciples and your Heritage, also searching you exactly what you need. You need a monster, you get a monster. You already have a monster, you get a trap. You already have a trap, a monster, you get a a spell. This is why this card was so important for the deck, and I think this is a bigger reason why the deck has pretty much lost all of its popularity. It's not Card of Demise going to 1, it's basically Diagram going to 1. If Diagram was a 3, this deck would be really good. So yep, this is why you need to play other stuff in the deck in order to be able to capitalize on the advantages of this particular deck. Now for the true Dracos, they're not enough on their own, so we need to play Monarch cards. Not play Monarch monsters, but the Monarch spells and traps are actually really good. The deck was playing a Monarch trap beforehand, so now with Pantheism back at 3, not only does this give us more draw power, but we have a way to search the trap that we were playing anyways. So we play 3 Pantheism. Pantheism is the one that gives you your draw power, and it's the one that searches you. And this is the reason I've cut Pot of Desires from the deck, because with Pantheism you need to have 3 copies of the same card in your deck in order to make sure that you get the card you want, because your opponent gets to pick which one. So if you banish 1 or 2 copies with Desires and your opponent's just not going to give you Erupt, it's going to give you either a card that doesn't affect them, or basically if you've banished a lot of cards, they will give you another copy of Pantheism, which could be dead in this deck if you have multiples, because it's not like you will always have another Monarch spell and trap in your hand to be able to discard for. But thankfully Diagram helps with that, so if you don't have anything else, then you can just destroy the Pantheism with Diagram if you draw it, so you can get a search with that, so that's really good as well. 3 copies of Domain. This is another Floodgate that you can play in the deck. The deck didn't used to play this because Diagram was at 3, so you always won't have a Diagram on the field, but now with Diagram at 1, it's not like you will always have it on the field. It's just 2 copies of Diagram in the deck. You're not going to see it every single game, so Domain is another way you can win the game with the deck right now. And 3 copies of Strike of the Monarchs. This is something that Monarchs used to side against stuff like Evenly Matched. Now it can work against Lightning Storm too. So you tribute a level 5 or higher normal summon monster, you target any card on the field and negate its effects and draw 1 card. It also has an effect that you can banish from the grave to declare an attribute and make all monsters on the field that attribute for the turn. That's not really relevant, but the first effect, that's because it's a quick play, you can use it during your opponent's turn to tribute a monster, you will draw something, and the monster you tribute doesn't really matter because you don't want to have multiple monsters on the field anyway, because you do play there can be only one, so if you have that out, having that monster on the field means that you won't be able to summon another one next turn because they're all worms, so just tributing means that you can tribute another card to pop another card, and you also get to replace the Strike of the Monarchs with the one card you draw, so this card is really good, and it's another discard outlet for your Pantheism of the Monarchs as well. I do play 3 copies of Pot of Duality. This card is really important because, like I said, you need to see exactly what you need in order to be able to play. 1 copy of Card of Demise. If you can draw that, then yes, it can give you a lot of games just by itself because it's so powerful, but being at 1 and unsearchable means that you're not going to see it very often. And 1 copy of Upstart because I wanted to maximize the potential to see the cards I need, just because the deck has lost most of its consistency, so playing 39 cards is basically a way to go. And for the traps, you play 3 copies of True Draco Apocalypse. This one is the one that cuts your opponent's monster attack in half. You get this with your Dynamite, and all the True Draco traps, when they're sent from the field to the grave, they pop monsters. This is the way the deck plays going second. This is why I said Amano Iwato can be useful, but instead of having 6 copies of traps like we should, True King's Return is still at 1, so we do have only 4. So even if you see Amano Iwato and with only 1 diagram, the hand has to be very specific in order to be able to break boards, so I don't think it's worth maining. Maybe you can side against decks that play a lot of negates, because you won't be able to play against these decks otherwise. 1 copy of True King's Return. I hope that this and Dynamite might go to 2 soon, maybe even 3, but Konami just doesn't want to take any risk, it seems, with its deck, because it has been very unhealthy, supposedly, for the game, because it doesn't let anyone play, but pretty much any deck has a win condition that, if done correctly, doesn't let your opponent play, at least nowadays, so I don't think having a control doesn't let your opponent deck play that deck versus a combo doesn't let your opponent play that deck be any different just because they play Floodgates. This is just a stereotype of the game that Floodgates are annoying. Well, yeah, look at what we're playing against right now. We're playing against stuff like Smoke Grenade, which is not a Floodgate, but it's worse than a Floodgate because it takes a pick at your hand and you basically lose the best card in your hand. We're playing against Buster Lock, which is a Floodgate, and we're playing against Miscellaneous Orders, which is better than a Floodgate because it stops you from doing anything to your opponent's board. So yep, if the format's going to be unfair, at least give us back some cards so we can have more decks at least be able to compete with the current meta. 3 copies of Monarchs are up. This is the Monarch trap the deck was even playing before it started playing all those Monarch cards in the deck, so you can have a way to search it right now with Pantheism. And also if you have multiples, which happened a lot because I was playing the deck a little bit during the day and I could tell you that you didn't have the chance to activate multiples during a duel, so the other ones are dead unless your opponent destroyed the first one with something. So if you have multiples, you can just discard them with your Pantheism, and this is why Pantheism is so good, because not only does it give you access to the cards you need, but it gets rid of the extra copies of the cards you don't need in your hand to hopefully give you better cards. 1 copy of Skill Drain, because Skill Drain is just a 4th copy of Monarchs are up that basically destroys your opponent. It's not as good as Monarchs are up because it affects your own monsters as well, so they do lose the effects of getting you your new cards, but still it's a win button against decks that do not have a lot of big monsters inherently, and this deck has big monsters, so you can just beat your opponent down. And 3 copies of there can be only 1 because you just need 1 monster in order to be able to win. You don't need anything else. Their attack is high enough. If your opponent gets rid of it, then you can just summon another one with tribute and another trap, so you can destroy your opponent's lone monster because this card doesn't let your opponent play. And it's really good against the meta because if your opponent plays like Infernobles and Dragonlink, they're all warriors, they're all dragons, so they have to have a lot of monsters on the field in order to be able to play because they're combo decks, so this card completely stops them. So yep, that's the deck, guys. It's a really good deck. I think the Monarch stuff basically revamped the strategy. It's still not as good as it used to be, but it's good enough to be playable. And this is what we want with True Draco, because it's a deck that always finds its way back into the meta. It's kind of like Burning Abyss. It's been alive ever since it came out, so this hopefully will revive the deck back again, so we can have a little bit more variety in the meta. So yep, if you enjoyed this video, guys, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and we'll see you next time.